Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. One day in late April 1862 in Charleston Harbor, a member of the enslaved crew of a Confederate cotton boat turned military transport joked that they should go ahead and seize and surrender the vessel to the Yankee Navy that blockaded the South Carolina seacoast. One of those enslaved men, a genial and persevering young man called the Major by his crewmates, took the idea seriously. He's pictured here. His name is Robert Smalls, and he served as the pilot of the sidewheel steam powered planter. And he knew how to navigate her through harbor security. He called the crew, those enslaved men, to his home, and they devised a plan. He canceled the first attempt because one of the men of the crew could not be trusted. He tried again in the early morning hours of May 13th, 1862. The three white officers, Confederate officers in command, had gone ashore to get a good night's rest as they expected to be away from Charleston for several days. They left the planter docked near Confederate headquarters, loaded with munitions destined for a newly constructed harbor fort. Smalls and five of his crewmates pulled away from the dock about 2 a.m. and traveled to a nearby wharf. There, they picked up 10 friends and relatives, including Smalls' wife Hannah, 14 years his senior, and their two young children. Hannah later told a reporter the whole party had solemnly agreed in advance that if pursued and without hope of escape, the ship would be scuttled and sunk, and that if she should not go down fast enough to prevent capture, they would all take hands, husbands and wife, brother and sister, and jump overboard and perish together. That was the plan. They steamed away from the wharf about 3:25 a.m. The first obstacle in the fort was Fort Johnson. Smalls followed protocol and exchanged signals with the guard without rousing any suspicion. The ship then approached Fort Sumter. Smalls donned the distinctive large straw hat left behind by the planter's captain. At some point, possibly about this time, he exchanged his worn red flannel shirt and jeans overalls for a suit that of clothes that had been left on board. Smalls went ahead and impersonated the captain. He later wrote, I leaned out of the window of the pilot house and gave the signal receiving all right in return and passed beyond Sumter's guns before anything wrong was suspected. When they saw that the planter was making for the Federal lines, they tried to stop us, but it was too late. The planter passed out of the harbor mouth and into the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, jittery Union sailors had expected an attack from rebel rams after rumor circulated that the ironclad monsters with their big rams on the end prowled the waters. At sunrise, as the early morning mist rolled across the waves, men aboard at least two of the Federal warships feared the worst when they spotted the planter headed towards them, black smoke belching from its stack. The planter steamed rapidly towards the clipper onward. Sailors, Union sailors on the blockade ship, readied for combat. Commander of the ship, J. Frederick Nichols, prepared to order his men to fire when an officer spotted an improvised truce flag made from a towel or a handkerchief or some sort of a bed sheet, something white fluttering. By this time, the planter was within audible range. Nichols yelled out, asking what boat that was and what she wanted. The reply was given, and the planter's errand explained, according to one account. Another report explained how one of the colored men stepped forward and, taking off his hat, shouted, Good morning, sir. I've brought you some of the old United States guns, sir. Nichols told the planter crew to bring the vessel alongside the Onward. They did not hear the order the first time. The boat moved in the wrong direction. Nichols now barked in a thundering voice, "Stop, or I will blow you out of the water." This time, they heard and they obeyed. Nichols sent an officer and four men to board the planter. The initial joy and relief expressed by Smalls and the crew gave way to a request for an American flag. Nichols ordered the Onward's ensign lowered, carried to the planter, and raised on her halyards. Navy personnel escorted Smalls to the fleet commander, Flag Officer Samuel DuPont. According to his official report, Smalls mentioned four big guns on the planter's deck, never to be delivered to the Confederate fort for which they were intended. Quote, "One of the four belonged to Fort Sumter and had been struck in the rebel attack on that fort on the muzzle," end quote, explained DuPont, who added that Smalls, quote, "informed me of this fact, presuming it would be a matter of interest to us to have possession of this gun," end quote. Of course, they were talking about one of the federal guns that was mounted on Fort Sumter during the attack in April 1861 that precipitated the war. The capture of the planter made headlines across the North and the South. One admiring Philadelphia newspaper called Smalls the Black Lion. A New York Tribune editorial stated, "If each one of the generals in our army had displayed as much coolness as he did, Smalls, when he saluted the rebel flag and steamed past the rebel forts, by this time the rebellion would have been among the things that were." Smalls received full credit as the mastermind of the operation. He also earned a share of the prize money, a common Navy practice, and later used part of it to buy the very plot of ground in Beaufort, South Carolina, on which he was born and raised by his mother Lydia. She toiled as a slave in the household of her master, a man named John McKee, who, according to her family descendants, was the biological father of Smalls. In the summer and fall of 1862, the period when President Abraham Lincoln shared the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet and waited patiently for an opportunity to release it to the public, Smalls made two trips to the North, organized by political and military men who identified him as a potential leader and a recruiter of African American military volunteers. Both helped move forward the cause of freedom and equality. In October 1862, Smalls returned to South Carolina and DuPont. The commander tapped Smalls's knowledge of area waterways and locations of underwater mines, or torpedoes, as they were called back in that part of the 19th century, that Smalls had placed. He actually had placed them in defensive positions while he was under Confederate control. Small resumed his duties as a pilot, this time as a civilian contractor for the United States government. Over the next 3 years, he served on a number of vessels, including the twin turret monitor Keokuk. He was aboard that battleship during an April 7th, 1863 attack on Fort Sumter. Struck 96 times by enemy shot, the Keokuk sunk the next day. Smalls survived the attack, but suffered powder burns that affected his eyesight. Later that year, Smalls piloted the planter on a mission to deliver rations to soldiers on Morris Island when the ship and crew got caught in a heavy crossfire between Confederate and Union gunboats and land-based batteries. The captain of the planter, a man named Nickerson, panicked and took shelter in a coal bunker. Smalls assumed control and navigated the planter to safety. The captain was cashiered. Smalls took his place and his title and served in this capacity until the fall of 1866. The planter eventually became a packet ship running goods and passengers up and down the coast of the Palmetto State. In 1876, she sunk off Cape Romaine, about 40 miles north and east of Charleston. By this time, Smalls had entered politics first as a state legislator and, from 1875 to 1887, as a U.S. congressman. His political career was tainted by scandal in 1877 after a court found him guilty of taking a bribe in a case motivated by an anti Black backlash during the waning days of Reconstruction. The governor pardoned Smalls 2 years later. He went on to serve as U.S. Collector of Customs in his hometown of Beaufort. Smalls died in 1915 at age 75 of malaria and diabetes. He outlived Hannah, who died in 1883, and a second wife, Annie, whom he wed in 1890. Two daughters and a son survived him. Historians salute Smalls as the hero of the planter and a man who charted a course to equality for African Americans. My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere, Smalls once stated. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of A Life on the Civil War Research Trail.